Hey, John, my husband and I just bought a house. Made me think, Friends Talk Financial Planning. I'm Bridget Sullivan Mermel, and I've got a family financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm John Shearer. I've got a family financial planning practice in Middleton, Wisconsin. And before we hear the story about your new house and what lessons you learned from that, I want to remind everybody to hit that subscribe button. When you subscribe to our show, it helps other people find this content and helps us in the algorithms. So, Bridget, let's dig in. And you bought a new house, right? This tell us the story. What happened? What'd you learn?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure people know we'll talk about what's happened with me, what the current market is, and then our general guidelines on what to think about when you're buying a house.
Yeah,
So,
great.
okay, so we decided to buy a house. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about is what's the market like now? So the first element that you hear, and I didn't really know what it meant, was it's low inventory. And then another thing you hear, again, didn't know what this meant, I've never experienced it before, is that it's a seller's market. And I also want another factor that's in play is high interest rates. Okay, so that I knew what that was.
Yeah.
All
But
right,
low
so
inventory though, like I drive past the car dealership and there's only 7 cars in a lot. That's low inventory. There's all kinds of houses around. Like, right? What is tell us about that one?
well, the thing that I've deduced is that because people have mortgage rates that they think are low, whatever they are, because the mortgage rates have been at historical lows, they're hesitant to sell. And also because of the Great Recession that we experienced, 15 years ago ish, 10
Yeah.
to 15 years ago, there was not that many new houses being built. So those, and then we had the pandemic and we had supply chain issues. So, which I think are kind of have been worked out. That's what I've experienced so far. But those factors are all in play so that there's just not as many houses on the market as there probably is demand for. So the it's kind of a weird one because people it's not really driving up the prices as much as it normally would because of this high interest rate thing. So it's almost like, geez, what the Fed is doing seems to be kind of working, honestly, from a macroeconomic point of view.
Yeah.
But what it means that is that when you're looking, you might not have as many places to look at as you usually would. And the nature of the sellers is a little bit different. So I'll get into that. So the sellers, I am going to compare myself to 2 other people that I know. And the sellers seem to be people who need to get out for some reason. So it's not as many people who just want to upgrade their lifestyle. It's more people that they have to make this decision. They're not doing it because they feel like they want to. In our situation, as far as selling our current house, we're not as intimidated by the high interest rates that other people might be, because when we first bought, both my husband and I, when we first bought our principal residences, the interest rates were at least this or higher. So we know, like, okay, we'll just refinance,
Right.
trudge along, refinance, do the paperwork, it'll be fine. That's what we're planning on. So that's not as big of a factor for us. But for a lot of people, the sellers are problematic. And so I'll tell you my story if you want to hear it, and then I'll spice it up with some others. But first, why don't you
Yeah.
see if you've got any questions for me?
Yeah, I want to hear the whole story. I know a little bit about what went on with you, but it's always interesting to me, this idea of supply and demand, right? The seller's market, and there's not enough inventory. And so when we have people that want to buy houses, there's not enough houses that people are selling. Does that mean that the buyers are all coming from apartments or other places, right? Because in your situation, you want to move to another house. Well, you have your house to sell. So if I live in a house and I'm buying another house, it seems like it should cycle over. And yet, I mean, and that's not what's happening, right? So there's obviously something, as I think about it, if I move from one house to another house, I free up one house and I buy another, that the inventory is or that supply and demand is somewhat level. But again, we're not seeing that, so that reasoning is not right. Do you have any sense
Yeah, I
for
don't
like
think it's as
buying?
level as usual. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way. So I know in certain, yeah, like we're planning on selling our house, and so that would be a level, right?
Right.
But the people who we bought from are moving into another place they own. And other people that I know are renters, that other examples that I have are renters that are moving up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then there's also people who are like in retirement or died, and so they're kind of in that stage. So it's just a little bit of a different situation than usual, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's
it's
just
just like the
interesting.
stock market. It's like every situation is always unusual and unique.
Yeah, yeah, it goes through some of those ups and downs and things. And there's so many different factors, right? It's not this exact comparison. It seems like, oh, it should be simple, but it really isn't that.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about your experience and like what went on and how, the what happened for you.
Well, we were concerned about the sellers actually getting their stuff out of the house. And indeed, when we got there, we were there for the final walkthrough, which is what's scheduled 1 hour before the closing.
Yeah.
And they still had the moving van there, and we're trying to get rid of the stuff and really not even taking all the stuff off the walls. And then at the appointed hour for the closing, one of them wanted to take a shower. It's like, how about if we go to the closing? Anyway, and we ended up with a boat and a
Oh,
Jeep
nice.
and two snowplows, all that we worked through at the closing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And so then I talked to my attorney about it, and because I knew that from some other people that I know that this was not really. I've certainly never experienced this before. I've never really heard about something like this before, and so I talked to my attorney, and he said, "Yes, indeed, that is happening more right now." And
Hmm.
again, it's because the people have issues. So one of my friends bought from a hoarder, and so the same kind of stuff. So I had asked her, like, what do you do if people
Yeah.
don't move
Right.
out? And then another person that I know bought from a cat hoarder. So again, it's like not, and I've never known anybody that's bought in these kinds of situations before. So it's just a different kind of market. And I think there's probably deals to be had if you're up for, doing some work. That's the other thing. So there's a little bit more work involved. We're doing some work on the house because again, the people were not quite keeping up on it, but it's not bad. It's great.
Yeah.
Actually, we're really excited about the house and actually like these people. It was just like it was hard for them to detach. That's what
Yeah.
I would say,
Interesting.
and it's like, yeah, that's what I would say about the owners. I like them just fine. They're perfectly wonderful people, and I'm really grateful that they sold us their house.
Yeah.
But it was not smooth sailing.
Was that smooth? Bridget, I wanted to circle back on one thing if we can, and just in talking about that idea of the market imbalances and things and where the supply and demand might be. And you mentioned that, you and your husband are in a spot where you don't need to sell, right? You're not over a barrel. You sort of wanted to.
Right.
And I know before we hit record here, we talked a little bit about your reasons for wanting to, but maybe that would lead into a discussion about how you make that decision to buy. Would you mind sharing some of those things about why you made the move and like some of the maybe remodeling things you were looking at with your old place?
We put a list together on our current house, which is just fine. There's not, but we put a list together on our current house of what the types of things that we needed to do to really be happy with it. And then, and it costs quite a bit of money.
Sure.
And the other thing is that our ages make a difference too, I would say. We're both 60. And so that makes you look at things a little differently. It's like, okay, this would be nice to get something now that I'm really happy with now. Like, what are we waiting for if we can
Yeah.
do this? And and we also know what it's like to live through renovation when you're living there and the types of projects that we had. So that we
And
wanted to
it's not
do.
fun, are you saying?
No, it wouldn't be fun to live through these kinds
Yeah.
of renovations,
Yeah.
versus if moving into a new house where we're doing some renovations before we move in, not extensive, but some stuff, that's like actually similar to some of the stuff we would need to do here. And, but we're not living there yet. So it's chaotic.
Yeah.
but it's not the same as when you're living in it. And
Different.
so those were the factors that were in play. And also, honestly, during COVID, I was driving around Chicago, and I'm still living in Chicago with a new house, but I was driving around and I was like, I'm kind of bored. I need to refresh this.
Scenery. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to refresh. And and then like I said, it was just a good time. We've lived in our current house for 12 years. And so it's not like, and it's appreciated too. So that's good.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed like a great time to go.
One of the things that you talk about, I really appreciate you saying, hey, it's the cost of remodeling and improving, your old house. But in addition to that, it's the inconvenience in those things, right? But
Yeah.
going back to the cost side of it, kind of one of the fundamentals that I often talk about, and I think you do too, is the value you get from remodeling a place. What you put into a remodel doesn't come out in value. And so oftentimes you're better off buying something different than doing a remodeling project, right? So sort of underlying to what you were describing there. And maybe that would be a good thing to circle back on for viewers about, like, what are the guidelines that you use when you're talking about buying a house and how to think about that?
So our recommendations are buy a house that's 2 to 2.5 times your income. And we've got another episode about if you want to stretch it. That's a whole different topic.
Yeah.
But 2 to 2.5 times your annual income. And also you want to be there for 5 years. So if you're just going to be there for a year or two, don't do that. Put 20% down.
Can I
You gotta
stop?
have some money around.
So let me just stop right there for a second. I really appreciate, like, these are exactly in line with it, but 2.5 times. So if you and your husband are making $200,000, let's say,
Right.
2 times that would be $400,000 to $500,000. Two to two,
Exactly.
so just to put it in some dollars. Hey, if it's
Thank
at
you.
100, right?
Like, who likes
$400,000 to
math? Yeah.
$500,000, and then 20% down. So we're talking like $80,000 to $100,000 of
Right.
being able to make a down payment on it, right?
Right.
Just to kind of put some framework, and of course, double or half that, you can kind of do some math. But
Yeah.
that's the metric we're talking about. Okay,
And
awesome.
so I take a top-down approach to how much house to buy instead of a bottom-up. And that's because in my life, I bought a condo and I took the bottom-up approach, and I figured out, oh, what are all my expenses going to be? What will the bank give me? All that kind of stuff. And
Yeah,
I was totally house poor. Like, you consistently underestimate how much a house is actually going to cost you. And we actually have, there's a recent study that that shows, like, why is it so hard for people to save up enough for maintenance costs? Well, our recommendation is to spend 1 to 2% of your house's value on maintenance costs, but what people actually spend is 4%. Okay, so that means if you buy that $500,000 house, what's 2% would be 10,000 a year.
yep,
But what people spend is 20,000 a year.
yeah. Yeah, it's
So
interesting. We talk with people about budgeting for those, and I think that maybe what you is not, hey, plan, like, go out and spend this money, but no, you got to sort of have it in mind that it's going to cost this. I always find that a really interesting one, that I've never personally had that experience of it being at that level on an annual basis. Occasionally
yeah,
here and
yeah.
there.
And it might be because my houses have been older.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you got to plan for it, right? People think, oh,
yeah,
I can buy this much house. Well, you got to plan for. I mean, be prepared. Don't be surprised when it costs $5,000 or $10,000 a year just to keep it up, right? That's one of
right.
the costs that don't factor into when the bank tells you how much house you
They
can
don't
buy.
care. Yeah, the
Yeah,
bank is thinking about how much risk they can take, and they allot for a certain number of people getting into foreclosure. They don't
right,
care. Like,
right,
okay, maybe it's 1% of their
right. I
people.
don't want to be part of that
They don't
1%,
care.
right?
But I don't want 1% of my experience to be in foreclosure.
That's right. That's
My
right.
100 years, I don't want one of those years to be in foreclosure at all.
Right.
So it seems like that's a great place to wrap it up.
That's
So
great.
I'm Bridget Sullivan Mermel, and I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm John Shearer. I've got a fee-only financial planning practice in Middleton, Wisconsin. Both Bridget and I are taking on new clients. So if you like what you hear on our show, please reach out. But we're also both members of the Alliance of Comprehensive Planners. And if you like what we talk about and want to find somebody who thinks similarly in your local area, you can check out acplanners.org.
And please subscribe.